Okay, we're gonna talk about mixing thin set here real quick, and I just want to give you a little tidbit here. I usually only, unless I'm doing big areas on the floor, I usually only try to mix a half a bag of thin set at a time. When you do a full bag, an average 5-gallon bucket like this, it's gonna be right at the top, and it's really hard to mix. So sometimes what I'll do if I have bigger floors is I'll just mix 3/4 of a bag at a time. And basically, I look on the bag to see how much water, because every thin set is different, but the type that I'm using today, it calls for about 5.5 quarts of water for the full bag. Sometimes I add a little bit more than that, depending on how it mixes. But if you want to mix half a bag at a time, if you have 5.5 quarts, that would be about 2 3/4 of a quart. So, but half a bag, I just measure the bag. And so if it was 20 inches, I would just make a mark at about the 10-inch mark. And then I would dump my 2 3/4 quarts of water into the bucket first, and then I'd just grab the bag right there, and that's where I know I would split it in half. And I would pick it up and empty it and hold it right there. Okay, and then the other thing that you can do is you could measure it in fourths. So you could just measure fourths, and if it's 20 inches, then obviously it'd be every 5 inches would be a fourth. So you could just make a mark. So if you only wanted to mix 1/4 of a bag at a time, you could just make a mark like at 5, 10, or you know what I mean. I should have started down here. 5, 10, 15, and then this would be the other 1/4, obviously. So then you just hold your hands in those spots, and that's going to kind of give you a good idea of not using too much or too little. Or once you open it, then the bag starts to spread out anyway, so you don't really get the effect that you had before you opened it. Oops. So I used about 1/4 bag. So I'm just gonna put 3 quarts of water in. And I'm gonna mix up a little bit more than a half a bag. So just dump a little in. Okay, so now I mixed it for a little bit. Now I'm gonna let it sit for about 5 minutes, then we'll mix it again. And if it's too thick, you can just add a little water. Now, a trick to doing that, if you only need a little, is just take your sponge and squeeze. Okay, so now I'll let this sit for 5 minutes, and then we will mix it again before we start using it. Now, that was about 3/4 of a bag that I had in there, and then I grabbed it right here at the bottom on my 1/4 mark, where I marked, and I held it in there. And so you can see that's how much I have left. So I really mixed a half a bag there. And I used about 3 quarts of water. And then I actually added just a little squirt more. So it's a little bit more water than what the bag says, but as long as it's not runny and watery, then that's the consistency you want to get to, is right kind of like how it is, where it still sticks on the paddle, but it's going to drip down. And this is going to thicken up a little bit over the next 5 minutes while it's drying. So basically that's what you want to do to mix thin set. I know I'm using a big drill here, but you can use a smaller drill and get a mixing paddle. You don't need the big honking drill like I got here. I just have this because I do it every day. But basically, if you just have a little drill and just add a little bit of thin set at a time until it gets mixed up, and then add a little bit more instead of trying to dump the whole half in at one time, it'll be a lot easier on your drill. Thin set is a tough material to mix with a smaller drill, so you want to make sure that you're using somewhat of a decent sized drill. Don't use a little tiny little drill that could hardly drill a hole. So anyway, and you don't want to mix it by hand. Use a drill with a paddle. So that's it for mixing thin set.